Good afternoon. I'm Reverend Will McGarvey, and this is Reverend Christy Ramage. We're glad to be able to do another devotion today. I have an opening prayer from this book by Walter Bruegemann, Prayers for a Privileged People. It's called Our Charter of Entitlement. Oh God, we are mostly the kind of people who do well and who mean well. We know how to do what must be done, and we get up and do it. We have a sense of our worth and our capacity to perform. We care for our children and our futures and our good schools, and after good schools come college and learning and degree and profession and security. We sit in and enjoy our responsible entitlement that we have surely earned. But along with success and well-being, we wish our children happy, so we protect and extend adolescence. We build barriers against ugliness and failure and struggle with too much work and stress. We have and treasure all the signs of entitlement, all the props of affluence, all the symbols of well-being. How peculiar that we have it all and worry about immigrants who might acquire some small part of our legacy. In this moment of candor before you, we step into that gap in our life, between assured entitlement and the threat of immigrants, between our indulgence of our children and the violence that mostly lacks shame. Move us by your hovering, that we may come to ourselves, that we may notice the ways in which we are far from home, that we may reckon how we have betrayed ourselves for quick fixes. Give us the capacity to return to you, to be welcomed home, to be forgiven, to be invited to dance and then to a fatted calf, to receive it all as a gift from you. As people of entitlement and violence, we converge with immigrants. We learn together how deeply in need we are. Receive us and move us that we may accept your welcome to newness. Return us to innocence even while we are frightened. Exhibit to us our great simplicity among our complex habits. Call us at last by our right names, because we are yours.
Amen. And I would like to follow that with a portion of the prayer that we used on Sunday as the opening prayer that specifically links entitlement to racism and entitlement in terms of being white. So let me just read a portion of this prayer. Holy God, in our efforts to dismantle racism, we understand that we struggle not merely against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities, those institutions and systems racism alive, by perpetuating the lie some members of are inferior and others superior. Give us the grace and strength to rid ourselves of racial stereotypes that oppress some of us while providing entitlements to others. And then it goes on, but it's that one line that really strikes me. And again, as a prayer, give us the grace and strength to rid ourselves of racial stereotypes, and I would add patterns and conditioning that oppress some of us while providing entitlements to others. And I think that the challenge of entitlements that come to us as people who are white is that we're often not aware of them. And I think in this time of heightened awareness around racism, part of our journey is to begin to see things that we have not seen before. And I think part of that is our entitlement, that we simply assume certain things in our lives that in fact are entitlements at the expense of others.
I think a part of that entitlement, especially for us in our modern news cycle, is that it's hard to keep in mind all of those people whose lives are being detrimentally affected by our own government. And sometimes one crisis comes and another crisis comes. It's hard for us to even talk about COVID-19 much anymore because of all of the need to talk about race and Black Lives Matter. It's hard for us to even consider the plight of prisoners during COVID-19, overcrowded in jails, but also being there often as a part of the institutionalized racism of our criminal justice system. And we've almost forgotten totally about the immigrants that Walter Bruegemann kind of forces back into our imagination. The families separated, the tens of thousands still in detention centers on our border have been forgotten, and nobody's talking about them. Our media is not talking about them. Even the church is not talking about them and their need and their plight right now. Many of them still separated from their family members.
And really at risk for COVID. I mean, yeah. And I think so part of what you're saying is that entitlement comes in forms that are causing us even to be unaware of things that are happening on a national level.
And sometimes our own media contributes to that, and the lack of lifting up the continued issues for families separated at our border or being shipped home under a lack of media during the COVID-19 pandemic. We're not hearing the stories of people that are getting the virus, being exported to their home country of origin, and being put at risk for the very reasons for which they fled, to be able to come here seeking asylum. And the Catholic legal institution has been, or the, I can't remember the name of the group, but they're putting out a call that our government right now is trying to get rid of asylum as a part of our way of dealing with immigrants who come here, even though that's written into all of our international laws. It's written into all of our treaties. It's a part of our world right now, but they're trying to do away with asylum so that people whose lives are at risk in other places seeking safety can't come here.
Yeah, and that's part of our collective heritage, is to be able to offer that sacred, safe space. And I think that maybe just to segue, I think another facet of entitlement is the personal entitlement that we have as people who are white, and the assumption on the part of many of us that we simply live in a safe space. But that's actually an entitlement we are entitled to understand our lives without being fully aware of the implications of our lives. Maybe that's one way to say it. That our assumption of safety is not shared by everyone in this country, especially as we are increasingly becoming sensitized to people of color. And that the danger that they are perpetually in is coexistent with our sense as people who are white, with our safety. And that for us to begin, I think, to see that we feel entitled to be safe, that that's just normal for us. And I think that for us to see our entitlement is to begin to widen our vision and actually see how many Black lives are at risk. And how those two need to begin to speak to each other.
And maybe we even need to speak more clearly with our media and how we let go of certain issues, thinking that we don't have to be concerned of them as we turn our attention to the needs of today. As if all of those issues that were really huge issues 4, 5, 6, 12 months ago have just gone away and that they're now resolved.
When in fact they're not. I think in both cases, I was just going to say that in both cases there's this, I mean, a dimension of what we're talking about is that things just become invisible. I mean, what you're saying is the media shifts focus away from certain issues and certain people who are at risk, that those people's lives just become invisible. And I think as we engage from a place of white entitlement, it means that the dangers that people of color face also just become invisible, that they're parts of our awareness that just vanish. And I think what you're saying is we need to make sure that we see broadly now all of the ways that people's lives are being affected. And I think I'm saying the same thing, that we need to, from our place of entitlement, begin to see more widely so that we understand how our entitlement allows us to not see. We need to really, I think, step into that.
As Audre Lorde said, there's no such thing as a single issue person because all of our lives are always broader than just one single issue. So when we're asking for relief or justice for whatever portions of our lives, I think COVID started to point a lot of those things out, especially with folks that have asthma and respiratory disease being more at risk of this virus. That hasn't dawned on people at our own federal government and the Environmental Protection Agency, who said we can't regulate any of the emissions that you're doing, even in this pandemic, because we have to shelter in place. And so industry has had free rein to do as much pollution as they wanted, even as global emissions went down 17%, not close enough to the 35% where we would start to see a reheating with the aerosol masking effect going away. But for industry to be given permission to pollute more during a pandemic put real lives at risk.
Yeah, yeah. And we need to see that. We need to know that. We need to be aware of that. And that needs to be part of, I think, as people of faith, part of our commitment to justice is seeing exactly what you're describing.
It's hard
and
work.
Not allowing ourselves to become blinded or unaware. You know, I think that the danger here is losing our awareness, losing our capacity to see.
The other risk is focusing so much on that it becomes disabling for us to be able to do anything. And there's definitely a number of folks in the environmental movement that have experienced eco-angst and get stuck because they feel as if the problem's too big to address. And look how much more we've been learning about our ability to make a difference or not during these last few months. It seems a lifetime ago to think back to February and March. Life was so different.
Yeah, yeah.
Or two lifetimes ago.
Yeah, and it changed so abruptly without any warning and without any planning. All of a sudden, we're in a completely different world. Yeah.
And now it's easier. Now it's easier for us to see the police brutality that was always there, and now it's being recorded and it's being shared for our collective ability to be able to address it.
And one of the odd things I think about this new reality that we're living in because of COVID is that our attention is not as distracted. So all of us are looking at the video, right, of George Floyd, the videos of the protests. I mean, we are, I think, as a country, because everything slowed down and we were forced to live without many of the distractions that are normal in our lives. So that there's more of a capacity and more of a possibility of actually seeing things that we haven't seen before and seeing them more clearly. And police brutality is one of those things. And I think that white privilege is another one of those things.
And pulling on the strings that point out how interrelated it is, right?
Right, right. And that doing both the work, the systemic work, and also our own internal work. I think that we're having to work from multiple perspectives in order to really address entitlement, I think.
And even when I crochet, you know, when we pull on any of these strings, it has a direct effect on the others. When we start to see the intersections and the interconnections between all of the issues going on in our lives. I'm surprised that the black community hasn't been up in arms even more so than they have recently.
Yeah. But I think
It's,
as people who are white, for us to be able to join them and to, again, address our entitlement and see the ways that we participate in this racist culture, I think is really, really important. And one of the things, I mentioned this on Sunday, and so many of the people listening may already have heard this, but to me, I think it bears repeating, is that for me to have heard in a video online, a black man say that in an affluent suburb of Austin, where he lives, that he was going to check his mail at a communal mailbox place. So it wasn't right in front of his home, but a place where everyone in the neighborhood where he lived had to go, either by walking or driving. So there was a communal space where people picked up their mail. And what he was saying is that if a white woman was approaching this shared mailbox space, if he had driven and he saw this white woman approach the mailboxes, he would stay in his car because he understood that he would potentially be perceived as a threat by the white woman. And I just think for me that there was just this huge moment of understanding that the threads that connect us are ways that we have been shaped, both as people who are black and people who are white, to fear each other. And that in that moment, racism had shaped the black man to fear a white woman, and that the white woman had been shaped, conditioned to fear the black man. And so there was no connection between those two people. And potentially something that could have been a beautiful human interaction was avoided, was prevented, was disrupted because of the conditioning that both of them potentially had. And we don't know what the white woman's experience was, but because this was spoken from the perspective of the black man. But I think as a white woman, I became aware of the interconnecting threads that you're talking about, that the conditioning of racism has entangled all of us. I mean, the threads, I think, are very much interwoven. And if you do pull on one.
well, and we could become victims of the racism as well as victimizers with the racism when we're not seeing correctly. But we become victimizers and victims of the internalized racism that we may have grown up with without recognizing it unless we've done some of that work ourselves. But that's a constant ongoing battle. And one of the people I've been appreciative of it and reading is a woman named Ijeoma Oluo, who wrote a fascinating piece for Elephant Journal. She said, "What I need to say is meant to make you uncomfortable. Believe me, that's 100% the point." And as people ask her what her recommendations for them to do at this moment, she says, "As a woman of color, I'm tired of the hashtags and overused quotes and cookie cutter responses that are being highlighted by white allies on my newsfeed and social media in general. What I really want to see from those who consider themselves allies is the hard, sad, awful truth. Own your racist beliefs. Own how you were taught to be racist. Own that you've carried these ingrained beliefs with you into adulthood. It's not enough just to say, I know I've benefited from white privilege. Tell me how, and tell me how you've perpetuated white privilege and white supremacy and racism through both your action and your inaction. Sit in your yuck. Tell me about all the beliefs, conscious and unconscious, that make you racist. Tell me who taught you these beliefs, your grandma, your dad, your church, your friends. Tell me about the ways you practice or encourage white supremacy in your everyday lives. Tell me how many times you've said or wanted to say or sang along to the N-word. Tell me about the times you've locked your car door across the street to avoid a black man. Tell me how you don't see color. Tell me about all the times you ignored or laughed at or stayed silent about a racist comment or joke. Tell me how many times you've said there's only one race, the human race. Tell me all the times you thought or said out loud that someone was playing the race card. Sit in your damn yuck and feel it all. I think that's what the moment really encourages us to do, to own it. And we're not going to get over it until we own it and are more public about what we've experienced. That's a part of the process of exposing it in our lives.
Yeah, and I think that what has been clear to me is that, again, going back to the whole concept of entitlement, that much of what you just read is unconscious. I mean, there are, I think especially, and I've said this before in this context, but that especially for those of us who are white progressives, that we identify as non-racist, we identify as inclusive. And so for us to do the work, I think is critically important, and much of the work is work that we're not aware of, that we have to do, that there's this dimension of our work that is to bring to our awareness and bring to our consciousness the ways that we are racist. And I think that means doing things we haven't done before and really pushing ourselves to become aware of things that we're not aware of. And that's one of the definitions of entitlement, is that we're not aware of the ways that we simply assume our lives are normal. We're not aware of our entitlement. And so it's really...
Well, and even that term being non-racist, thinking that that's the opposite of being racist. Some of the best teachers we have right now, like Ibram X. Endi, is pointing out that the opposite of racism isn't being non-racist, it's being anti-racist.
Anti-racist, yeah. But I think to get there means really, really doing deep work of uncovering dimensions of our whiteness that we're really oblivious to.
So there's some opportunities coming up where you and I and members of our congregation and friends and family can participate in some educational events. Juneteenth is coming up Friday. The Interfaith Council is doing a special event on learning about Juneteenth, since it's not as well known outside of the African American community as it is inside. And that's Thursday night at 7 o'clock, and the information on how to jump on that Zoom event is in the e-blast. And then the denomination, the United Church of Christ, is doing something Friday morning for Juneteenth at 9. And that information is in the e-blast as well. And then our presbytery, our regional Presbyterian body here, especially led by Reverend Kamal Hassan from Sojourner Truth Presbyterian Church, and some of the other black elders and leaders in our presbytery, are putting on a special Juneteenth Freedom Day event Sunday night at 5 o'clock, and the link for that's inside of our e-blast as well, and on our Facebook page. So some good opportunities for folks to go deeper in their own work, to also sharpen each other and be present with each other as we do the work in our own communities.
Yeah, there are many, many, many resources now that are available. It's I think, just an amazing time in our history that so much focus now is on race and racism, anti-racism, and doing the work, again, that we as white people need to do. So yeah, those of you who are listening, I really encourage you to find resources that resonate with you. They're films, they're documentaries, they're books, they're articles, they're conversations with people, they're podcasts. There's so many ways now that you can enter into this time where potentially we can make a huge difference if we all join together. I think we're really, as a country, called to face into this moment and really address racism and dismantle it. And that means each of us doing work. All of us are part of this. Nobody's excluded. We've all been shaped by this culture. We've all been shaped by racism, consciously and unconsciously, and are called to do this work jointly. So please read the e-blast, find out the specific things around Juneteenth, and then engage the larger issues around racism and white privilege and entitlement. God has work for us to do, and it's good work. It's good work. It's hard work. It's painful work. It's difficult work, but it's really
gospel work.
Yeah.
Because if it's not good news for everybody, it's not good news for anybody.
Yeah. And that finally it's motivated by love and justice. I mean, that's who we are as people of faith. You know, it's to believe that justice is possible, grounded in love and peace, and will give us the energy and the strength to do the work. May it be so.
Amen. Thanks so much for this conversation today. See you in church on Sunday.
Sounds good. Take care.